Could we finally be seeing the destigmatizing and decriminalizing of sex work in America? Joining us now to help break down some recent developments is a reporter for The Intercept, Natasha Leonard. Natasha, welcome to the show.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Very glad to have you here. And so I want to start by talking about recent bills in New York, especially New York, but also California, that might decriminalize in various ways sex work. Let's talk about those. How have they been received? What is the chance of them passing? What's your take?
Well, I think the introduction, and particularly of the New York bill, which is a bill in both for the New York Congress and Senate, that are asking for there to be full decriminalization. And I think that's a really important thing for people to understand. This bill is saying that were it to be passed, any consensual exchange for sex would be decriminalized, as in it would be a legal exchange. This would remove sex work from the realms of policing, from the realms of the criminal justice system that does so much to police and stigmatize, punish, and incarcerate sex workers who are often some of the most vulnerable minorities. Certainly, many sex workers are Black trans women who are also some of the most policed and persecuted under current sex crime criminalization, sex work criminalization, excuse me. So this is a big deal to have state senators and major organizations pushing for full decriminalization, as opposed to some of the more limited models that individuals like Senator Kamala Harris are pushing for, which are not, in fact, decriminalization. They rather go towards criminalization of the purchase of sex, which still puts sex workers in vulnerable positions. So we're seeing a big shift to even have these bills on the table. How quickly we could see them pass, it's hard to know, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a long way off, especially in jurisdictions like New York, where Democrats are now in charge of the Senate.
So you've been talking about how the push from many of the activist groups who are promoting bills like this is for full decriminalization. Yes. I mean, you contrasted it with a more limited version, which we see in some countries, actually. So when we don't reach full decriminalization, when the idea is that the person purchasing it is still considered to have committed a criminal act, why is it that that still results in some really bad and unjust situations for the women involved in this?
Right. So this is known as the Nordic model because it is the model in place in many Scandinavian countries. And what it does is it pushes sex work as an industry underground. So even the claim that the sex worker themselves is not to be criminalized, anyone who's interested in engaging in the sex industry and buying sex must do so through a black or grey market. This means that workers have less access to workers' rights discourse, to going forward to complain about exploitation, to complain about mistreatment by managers, because then they're involving the criminal justice system. And what we've seen in Scandinavian countries where this is the case is the policing of individuals who are immigrants without paperwork. They're still very much watched. So even if it's only a John or a client who is being criminalized, the sex worker themselves is often swept up into a policed and criminal justice system. And this has played out very badly in terms of people losing their rights to the custody of their children and deportations. If this is an industry that can be decriminalized, it removes vulnerable people from proximity to a punitive carceral system. And that is the safest way in which sex workers can live and seek more robust rights and safeties. It's just an empirical fact that sex workers working in decriminalized zones are able to work more safely, work together, be in the open, and not risk further violence as well as exploitation from police and the criminal justice system.
So you mentioned Kamala Harris and her position on this. I'm curious, we know that there are politicians in New York who are pushing for full decriminalization. In the primary, are there any declared candidates out of the 37 or so that we have that are actually supportive of full federal decriminalization of sex work?
I have not heard that in so many terms from a single candidate. I think given that the attention that this is getting on a state level and that we are seeing a sea change around this discourse, a long overdue one that sex workers' rights advocates and people from within the industry have been ferociously fighting for decades and decades, given that we've seen this sea change shift in the mainstream discourse, I am curious what will happen and whether this will be an issue put before the presidential candidates. I'm certainly nervous that the fulcrum of discourse will fall around calling what Senator Harris put forward decriminalization, when, as I mentioned, it in fact would not be. But it would be definitely a promising step forward to talk about full decriminalization and how that is a workers' rights and feminist rights issue.
That's what's so interesting, because it clearly is a case where this is a group of workers who are incredibly stigmatized, have virtually no rights, could end up in jail and all of that. And you would think that people would be willing to stand up for it, especially when, generally when there are politicians who are not supportive of workers' rights, there's big money on the opposite side of the issue. But if there is in this case, I'm not seeing it. And so the lack of willingness of many politicians in the vast majority of cases at the state level, at the federal level, to not support this, is this just American Puritanism? The idea that this is just a group that, I mean, ideologically, yeah, we support them, but I don't want to be tied in with this group of people?
I think it's an intersection of a number of things that are not only unique to America. The stigmatization and the social treating sex workers as social pariahs and threats to the family form and the nation's body politic. These are age-old and deeply problematic. And also in a contemporary setting, all kinds of persecutions and abuses seep through, be it racism, anti-trans sentiment, general police treatment of sexual violence, the use, as we see all too often under this administration, but also those that preceded it, the use of claims of trafficking in order to police and deport immigrants. So sex workers' rights find themselves at the intersection of so many struggles that have meant a lot of mainstream politicians have been too wary to get behind it. But really, if we're going to be taking seriously workers' rights, if we're going to take seriously immigrant rights, trans rights, and women's rights, it would be a vast moral and political failure to leave sex workers out of this equation, let alone not to center them in these struggles.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Natasha Leonard, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching this clip from The Damage Report. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and ring the bell on YouTube to get notifications of our new videos. And of course, you can catch the full Damage Report live every weekday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific on TYT Network on YouTube TV.